Welcome back to Punk Rock Theologian. We're continuing through the book, and we've come to a bit of a Christmas in July, because today it's the Nativity story. This is Jesus' birth. Christmas gets only a handful of verses in Scripture that's really giving us any story there. The most colossal event in all of history, God becoming a man, entering into our reality, coming to us to make a way for us to come back to Him, gets like a sentence. We get so much of our ideas of what Christmas is like from artwork and decorations and Christmas plays and all this stuff that's tradition and not really scripture. And it's so important to not let all of that stuff get in the way and make that the lens you read scripture through, but to let the Bible speak for itself and let that be the real story. I'll just read it for you and then we'll unpack it. In Luke 2:2-7, at that time the Roman Emperor Augustus decreed that a census should be taken throughout the Roman Empire. This was the first census taken when Quirinius was the governor of Syria. All returned to their own ancestral towns to register for this census, and because Joseph was a descendant of King David, he had to go to Bethlehem in Judea, David's ancient home. He traveled there from the village of Nazareth in Galilee. He took with him Mary, to whom he was engaged, who was now expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for her baby to be born. She gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him snugly in strips of cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no lodging available for them. There you have it. Joseph and Mary have to travel from Nazareth to Galilee. That's about a 70-mile journey. And here's the first place that we mess it all up, because so much of our artwork looks like this. You see super pregnant Mary riding on a donkey that Joseph is leading along. Somewhere along the line, somebody decided that's what it looked like, and we've just been repeating that ever since. But there's nothing in scripture about that. Donkeys were sort of a fairly expensive thing. It was like having a nice vehicle in our day and age. There are other stories where people ride around on donkeys, and that's a bit of a status symbol of showing they don't have to walk like the commoners, which is another piece you've got to keep in mind. In this day and age, people walked everywhere. Taking long journeys on foot was commonplace, even for a pregnant woman. But that's the next piece. We don't really know just how pregnant Mary is. The Greek word translated there that is saying she's pregnant literally means swollen with child. So that means she's got a baby bump. She's showing a little bit. We know that she spent 3 months with her relative Elizabeth, so she's at least in her second trimester. But that's all we know for sure. Somehow we always picture this, that they're like barely getting to Bethlehem and she's going into labor and they're desperately trying to find somewhere for her to give birth. That's not in the story. She might be 9 months pregnant. She might be 3 months pregnant. Then it says while they're in Bethlehem, the time came for her baby to be born. That's probably where we get the idea that like as soon as she got there, she had this baby. Because we're looking at it through a modern concept and think that like, oh, you go there for a day or two. We don't know how long they stayed in Bethlehem. You don't make a 70-mile journey on foot and come home the next day. Not to mention this census was gonna take a while. There's some hints in Matthew that make it seem like they actually relocated and they live there now until they end up fleeing to Egypt, and that's a whole different story. But what we know is while they're there, she gives birth and famously lays Jesus in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. And here's where we have whole stories of them looking for somewhere to stay and the kindly old innkeeper that finally says, well, there's a stable out back and you can stay there. None of that exists in the Bible. I read it to you. He wasn't in there. In fact, this translation that I read doesn't even use the word inn. And I'm sure that's deliberate. The Greek word there is katalima, and it really just means a lodging place. There is another Greek word for an inn. It's pentakaion. Luke uses that later in chapter 10, the story of the Good Samaritan, when he takes the guy to an inn. And so it's telling that he didn't use that word here. He's not talking about that sort of an inn. Bethlehem was a very small town, a few hundred people. They didn't get a lot of travelers. If you look at the stories in like Genesis 19:1-3 or Judges 19:14-21, you see what hospitality looked like in this culture. A traveler would come to town and someone would take them into their home. And that's what a katalima is. The best concept for us would be like a guest room. And oh, by the way, architecture of the time also included an attached stable, a place where the animals were kept. It's sort of the equivalent of we would have an attached garage. That room was called a manger. Imagine like going home for the holidays, going back to grandma's house kind of a thing, the whole family gathering there. It would be like if we showed up and the cousins are already used up all the beds and it's like, well, you can set up a cot out in the garage. That's kind of what we've got going on here. The logical place for them to gather would have been at like the oldest living patriarch's house. Whether or not there was any space left for them, they probably didn't get a very warm welcome. Don't forget, there's this whole thing where Mary's pregnant, they're not married. She insists that she hasn't been unfaithful, but it's God made her pregnant, and Joseph believes her and is going along with it. I think it's a safe bet that his friends and family think that he is nuts and she's a harlot, and so they have to stay out in the stable with the animals. And that's where Mary gives birth. But maybe. We don't know that she actually gave birth there. We know that she ended up laying Jesus down there. And the word manger actually does also mean a feeding trough, and it sure sounds like they kind of use that as a makeshift bassinet, and that makes sense. Once again, we've got like one verse on this, so any stories we have are speculation. Frankly, the underlying message of all of it is that Jesus didn't show up in this bougie scene getting all lavish and pampered and people celebrating his arrival. Jesus showed up in a poor family in an unwelcome environment, and the only people that came and celebrated him were like the social outcast shepherds. This is the King of Glory coming to us. That's what Christmas is about. And so don't get hung up on having the nativity scene with a donkey in a stable and stuff. It may or may not have been there. None of that stuff's the point. Jesus is the point. Focus on him.